Okay, children, here we are, Pugs of the Frozen North. Let's find out what happens in the rest of chapter 1. This is what we read yesterday, and we got to this part here. First, the creaking of metal as the ice tightened its grip upon the old ship's sides. Then the voice of Captain Jeggings bellowing, "All hands on deck!" The crew bumbled, blinking from their bunks. Able Seaman Bo, Mungbean, the ship's cook, and Shen. They stumbled out on deck and stared at the frozen waves which reared up all around them, stiff and white as giant meringues. "Don't just stand there," shouted Captain Jeggings, hauling on an icy rope. "Get us out of here!" The rope snapped in his hands with a sound like breaking glass. The Lucky Star groaned and quivered as the ice clenched tighter. "What shall we do?" asked Shen. But Captain Jeggings didn't know, nor did Able Seaman Bo, nor did Mungbean. They'd weathered storms and sat out calms, but they'd never seen a sea like this before. Creak! Crunch! Big tusks of ice pushed the planks apart and pierced the Lucky Star's sides. Slosh! Gurgle! Cold black water, which hadn't frozen yet, came swirling in. The ship sagged, and all the icicles that decked her rigging tinkled cheerfully. But Captain Jeggings couldn't see anything to be cheerful about. "The cargo!" he shouted. "We must save the cargo!" All summer long, the Lucky Star had been cruising from port to port, selling this and buying that. 2,000 chunky knit jumpers from the Isles of Oran, a second-hand snowmobile, and 66 pugs. Captain Jeggings had said those tiny dogs would sell like hot pies. Now, down in the leaking hold, they set up a terrible howling as cold sea sloshed round their paws. Here's the pictures. That's meant to be the sea. Well, the ice-covered sea. And this is obviously the ship here. You see it says there, Star. "The dogs!" shouted Shen. "We must save the dogs!" Mungbean and Bo went running down the steep stairway which led to the cargo holds and came struggling back up with crates of jumpers. Captain Jeggings winched the snowmobile over the ship's side. Meanwhile, Shen upended the boxes where the pugs slept. The tiny dogs raced up on deck and jumped off the Lucky Star's sides onto the ice. Shen had heard people talk about rats leaving a sinking ship before, but he'd never heard of pugs leaving a freezing one. There's a first time for everything, he thought, as he dragged the sack which held their leads up onto deck and threw it after them. The Lucky Star shuddered again, squeezed in the teeth of ice. Rivets popped out of the deck. The funnel trembled like a chopped tree. "Abandon ship! Women and captains first!" shouted Captain Jeggings, jumping over the side. But Shen had thought of something else that needed to be saved. "The dog food! It's still on board!" "It'll have to stay there then!" yelled Bo, jumping down onto the ice with Mungbean. Shen passed the smallest of the pugs down to them, then jumped after them. With a final heave, the ice crushed the old ship flat. Shen and the pugs stood and shivered while Captain Jeggings and the others got the snowmobile ready. Its engine coughed and snarled as they started it up. Into its trailer they piled the crates of cargo, but there was no room for the dogs. "We can't leave them behind," wailed Shen. "Well, we can't stay here with them," said Captain Jeggings. "This ice might melt as quickly as it came, and then where would we be?" "Way out at sea, without a ship under us. Awkward." He had told Shen that the 66 pugs would sell like hot pies. But he meant that they would sell in hot pies. His auntie ran a pie shop at home, and she was always looking for new ingredients. They were by far the least valuable bit of his cargo, so he had decided to leave them behind. "Maybe they'll follow us," said Shen. He climbed aboard the snowmobile with Bo and Mungbean and the captain. "Come on, doggies," he called to the pugs. The dogs looked up at him, heads on one side. Their hot breaths steamed and smouldered in the cold air like the breath of 66 tiny dragons. The snowmobile set off with a roar. The tower of crates in its trailer teetered and swayed as it went weaving its way between the frozen waves. The pugs sat where they were and watched it go. "Come on!" shouted Shen, but they didn't seem to understand. That's Shen. Here are the pugs, looking a bit confused and bewildered. Look, that one's sniffing that one's bottom. Anyway. "Wait for me, Captain," he yelled, and jumped down off the snowmobile. The frozen waves were slipperier than hills of ice. He slithered over them, back to where the pugs sat. And when they saw Shen coming, their tails began to wag, and they ran to meet him. "Come on, doggies," he said, patting 66 small, soft heads and getting licked by 66 small, soft tongues. "You've got to follow Captain Jeggings." Look at this big picture. But when he turned to look for the snowmobile, it was nowhere to be seen. Either Captain Jeggings hadn't heard when Shen shouted for it to wait, or he had decided that Shen and 66 pugs were not worth waiting for. And that is the end of chapter 1.